Impact segment tonight, the movie Frost Nixon opens this coming Friday. It is an excellent film with a brilliant performance by Frank Langella as President Nixon, confronted by David Frost over his Watergate crimes. But there are current political overtones to the film, which director Ron Howard is open about.
I was connecting it to the Bush administration being at war in Iraq and Afghanistan and the alleged abuses of power that were being discussed constantly.
Well, at the Washington screening of the film last night, Fox News anchor Chris Wallace had some words for Mr. Howard, and Chris joins us now from our D.C. bureau. So set the scene for us. You had just seen the movie, and then there was a discussion period. What happened?
That's exactly right, Bill. We'd seen the movie, and I agree with you. I think it's a terrific movie. Ron Howard is the director of it. And afterwards, there was a discussion, a presidential historian talking to Ron Howard, talking to a fellow who was the writer of it, and a technical advisor. And Ron Howard starts to say, you know, the reason I got interested in this project is because it reminded me, Nixon and Watergate, of what's going on in this country the last few years. And then the writer started talking about the same thing. And then the technical advisor, James Reston Jr., who in fact had worked with David Frost, said, you know, who is the person who will be Frost to George W. Bush the way Frost was to Nixon? Who's going to get him to tell the truth about all of his abuses of power? And the thing that was most striking to me was not only that the way they were saying this as if it was accepted wisdom, Nixon and Watergate as Bush in the last 8 years, but that this Washington crowd, Bill, is all sitting there and nodding their heads like, yeah, of course, we all agree on that.
And you didn't agree.
I didn't agree, and what they did after they had their panel discussion is they were handing out mics, and my wife, who's a much sweeter person than either you or me, says, no, honey, just keep quiet, don't say a word.
That's not a high bar, though, you know what I mean?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So in any case, she says, and I get ticked off. So I asked one of the guys for a mic, and he gives it to me, and I said, this is outrageous. This is nonsense. I mean, whatever you think of what George W. Bush has done over the last 8 years, he did it because of 9/11 and to keep this country safe. And the fact of the matter is that we're all here able to discuss this 7 years later, and the country hasn't been attacked again. And to compare that to Richard Nixon and Watergate and what was an effort to subvert the Constitution for his own private political gain is nonsense. Well, there was a smattering of applause, there were a few boos, and I have a feeling that all of my invitations to Georgetown cocktail parties were being promptly torn up.
But that's good. You'll be a much clearer thinker if that happens. Now, Howard, I think, is a decent man. I mean, he's a liberal guy, we know that.
But he's Opie, for God's sake.
Well, and Richie Cunningham. I mean, the guy's part of America, okay? But, I don't know him. I met him, after the New York premiere of this movie, which I liked and you liked. How did these guys respond to you? Because that seems to be pretty clear, that Richard Nixon subverted the Constitution to protect himself when he got in a tight spot, a spot that he generated, whereas Bush, like him or not, I mean, there's no evidence that he did anything venal, that he just said this is the best way to protect the country. I think that's pretty clear to fair-minded people. So how did they react to what you said, or did they at all?
Well, they didn't. They sort of sat back, and in fact, Peter Morgan, the writer, said, you know, the last thing I ever wanted this to do, although he had played along up to that point, was to make this into a George Bush movie. But the presidential historian, Robert Dallek, said, well, you know, I think actually there are comparisons, and we've never, we haven't seen the thousands of pages that will come out from the Bush administration, and of course we have seen the thousands of pages and hundreds of hours of tapes with Richard Nixon. And I said, well, that's fine. He said, as an historian. And I said, well, that's fine, Mr. Dallek, but you're making suppositions that aren't based on any facts.
Whatever happened to innocent until proven guilty.
Well, exactly. And if, as an historian, I would think you'd wait for the facts to come out.
Now, were people mad at you? Did you see anybody hiss at you when you walked out?
Well, as I say, originally there were a smattering of applause and a few boos. And I'm told afterwards, because this thing went on and on and on, and finally I said to Lorraine, I said, let's go home and go to bed.
Was your wife mad at you for embarrassing her?
Was she? No, not mad. She kind of shook her head a little bit and was.
She's used to you, right?
She's a civilian, as they say.
Yeah, she's used to you, though, right? She's used to that, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's the business they've chosen.
All right. Well, I'm glad you did that. I think that these people get into this mindset, and it needs to be challenged. It's an excellent film, and I recommend it for everybody. But you did the right thing, Chris, and we appreciate you coming on tonight.
Thank you, sir.
Plenty more ahead as the Factor moves along.